Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today I'm going to talk about Codename Nightmare. Now that name might be familiar to some of you, but I'm sure there's also plenty who've never heard of it before. It was actually the name for a limited time event that the Division 2 was going to have all the way back in early 2021, yet it never saw the light of day. However, with the recent news that the Resident Evil apparel event is coming back to the game later in Season 11, if you missed that, I'll pin the short I did of it up in the top corner. It has caused me to think back on Codename Nightmare because of the connection the two had. Personally, I find the lore and backstory to Codename Nightmare to be super fascinating, always have, and so I figured it would be fun, especially for those of you who weren't previously aware of it, to go back and talk about exactly what we knew about the mode and what happened to it. As well as, because it's me, throw in some fun speculation at the end about how we could possibly see it return. If you end up enjoying the video, a like would be super appreciated, and be sure to click that subscribe button as well as turning on the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Without further ado, let's get into it. So, what was Codename Nightmare? I want to play this clip that we got all the way back in September of 2020 at a Ubisoft Forward event where we got the announcement and the first marketing for this limited time mode. So, there you go. It was a super short tag at the end of this segment that they had, but even then, from the limited info that it gives, myself and many others were super hyped for it. The name, Codename Nightmare, the vibe of it being dark and stormy, super eerie, and of course the clear confirmation that this experience would take place at Kenley College, which is infamously, to this day, still the most requested piece of content in the game for Massive to retool or utilize in a different way than it currently is. And at the time, Codename Nightmare was finally going to do that. This led to weeks and months of speculation on what the limited time mode might be. People theorized hunter stuff, zombie stuff. I remember putting out a theory possibly linking it to the ongoing Season 4 story at the time. There was basically limitless potential. That was until it got cancelled. That's right, Codename Nightmare, despite how awesome its pitch was, never got released. It was back on State of the Game, which for any newer players was the weekly news show that the dev team would host, where Yannick was on stream and delivered the bummer news that due to the circumstances of development that year, keep in mind this was during the height of the pandemic, everyone was still working from home, and little did we know at the time how many resources had already been pulled off of the game to go work on Star Wars. They just didn't have what they needed to get the work done. They concurrently announced that in its place would be a super unique apparel event that would go live in the latter half of Season 4, and that it would contain some of the, quote, most unique apparel we'd seen. Well, we didn't know yet at the time, but that ended up being the Resident Evil apparel event, unique in the fact that it was a crossover concept and clothing. So, to this day, Massive never gave any sort of details or confirmation about what Codename Nightmare was going to be. Once it got cancelled, they rarely, if ever, spoke of it again. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail here, but over time, I did hear some whispers about a rough concept of what this mode might have been, and, you know, who knows if that was fully accurate or not, but it sounded pretty awesome. And I mean, even from the public information that we did have, everyone was anticipating that it would be awesome. I mean, they were going to be repurposing Kenley College. How dope is that? I think that alone got a lot of people on board. But also, I've spoken before about my personal adoration for limited time content. I come from a background of these kind of live games, World of Warcraft, Destiny, and you know, these pre-patch events or synchronized world events. They were always some of the most memorable moments for me in those games, simply because of the fact that you had to be there to experience it. And had Codename Nightmare been this limited 3 to 4 week mode that you could play and experience, I guarantee people would still be raving about it to this day. Now, the one thing I've seen consistently said for years now is people saying, well, now that the game is back and the fact that there's a new team in place, the devs should just finish up the Nightmare content and release it. From the information that I heard about this event, and I've seen many others come to this conclusion over time as well, Codename Nightmare was, without a doubt, going to be Resident Evil related. Whether it was in terms of characters, comms, story, enemies, whatever. The content we'd be experiencing at Kenley College would be under that contract that Ubisoft had with Capcom. And so, even if they were to be able to finish that content, that's great, but they would be contractually obstructed from ever releasing that mode. That's why I've said for years now, whenever I get asked, that there's no chance we'd ever see the Nightmare mode return. Well, that is until now. This is where I want to transition into some of that speculation I mentioned, but let me just say this off the bat. I think it is highly unlikely that what I'm about to lay out would actually happen. That's not to say it's impossible, and that's why I want to entertain the idea, but just know that while it sounds awesome and fun, it's more likely not going to happen than it would be to happen. But let me just frame it like this. Nightmare was never going to return after it missed the original window because the contract expired. They had very clear parameters about when and how it could be in the Division 2, except now, in a turn of events that I never thought would happen, there's there's a new contract. Ubisoft and Capcom have reached a new agreement to rerun at least the apparel event, as is evident by its presence on the seasonal track. And since that popped up, you've seen the likes of Morton and Palais stating that, yeah, they were able to sign a new deal, and this all happened to coincide with the release of the Resident Evil 4 remake, which maybe persuaded Capcom into saying yes. So, what if Codename Nightmare could secretly be coming as well? Again, as I said, this is very unlikely, but so was them re-upping this deal to begin with. Now, I have no idea how old development concepts work, right? When you work on something to the point at which they had worked on the old Nightmare mode, which to my understanding was pretty far in, they had a good chunk of it down, do you save those old files? Is there some kind of company protocol where you're forced to delete stuff after a certain period of time? Or are there special circumstances since it was a licensed deal? I simply have no idea, but especially if they did have those old Nightmare files and content stowed away somewhere, I could see a world in which they might actually bring it back in a few weeks' time when this apparel event goes live. I mean, it would certainly be a big way to earn favor with the community, bringing in a limited time mode in a season which has been dragged a bit for its lack of new content, and some might argue, well, they wouldn't keep that a secret. I'm not so sure. After the Season 11 reveal stream, many thought the idea of the castle coming back was shot because they didn't mention it during the stream, and then we logged in the next day and there it was, restored and being worked on. So there's a lot that would have to align for this to happen. I think they would definitely need to have those old files and that old work to still be around, otherwise they just wouldn't have enough production capacity to pull it off and polish it up. But if we were to find out in a few weeks' time that we are indeed getting a limited time mode in the latter half of Season 11, a lot of people would be very happy. Revisiting Kenley College, getting a new experience, fighting through some kind of Resident Evil style event, it'd be pretty damn sweet. And certainly an awesome way to end off Year 4 along with the finale of Season 11. So I will say one final time, do not get your hopes up on this. I think it's far more likely that they only had one apparel event prepped for Season 11, saw an opportunity to re-sign the contract and rerun the Resident Evil one, and it all worked out. But maybe the opportunity to actually showcase the content they had planned the first time around is what incentivized Capcom to give them the green light. Nobody knows for certain. The apparel event is currently slated on the seasonal calendar to go live on Tuesday, April 25th. So as we get closer to that date, keep an eye out. Maybe Massive has one more trick up their sleeve for Season 11. That's going to do it for me, folks, bringing y'all a bit of a history lesson as for the lore of the mysterious Codename Nightmare event, as well as some speculation on if it could potentially return later in Season 11. I'd love to hear any and all of your guys' thoughts below. If this was your first time hearing about the Codename Nightmare event, I would be super curious to hear your perspective on the idea of it, as well as the concept of limited time content in general. Is it something you're a fan of and might want to see in the future? Also, I'm interested in hearing people's thoughts on the legitimate chances of this thing returning. Could it actually happen? Let me know down below. That's all I've got for today, my friends. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Ow.